Title of the session is Man-Human Interface. We have three speakers this morning. And the first speaker is Don Howard. He's a professor of philosophy at Notre Dame. And he's director of the Riley Center for Science, Technology, and Values. He's also co-editor of the Einstein Studies and assistant editor of the collected papers of Alfred Einstein. Don's topic this morning is I Sing the Body Electric.
Thank you very much, Dan. Is it okay if I read from here? So let's go ahead and get started, if I might. Ordinarily, I just talk my talks. This time I'm going to read my talk, so bear with me here. So our topic today is supposed to be the machine-human interface, but I'm not going to talk about that, at least not under that description. Why not? The main reason, to be elaborated in a moment, is that the metaphor of the interface entails assumptions about the technology of biomechanical and bioelectric engineering that are already surprisingly obsolete. And therein lies a lesson of paramount importance for those of us interested in technoethics, namely that the pace of technological change is such as often to leave us plodding humanists arguing about the problems of yesterday, not the problems of tomorrow. Some see here a tragic irony of modernity, that moral reflection cannot perhaps, as a matter of principle, keep pace with technical change. We plead the excuse that careful and thorough philosophical and theological reflection take time. But I don't buy that. Engineering problems are just as hard as philosophical ones. The difference is that the engineers hunker down and do the work, whereas I worry that we humanists are something of a lazy bunch. And we definitely don't spend enough time reading the technical literature if our goal is to see over the horizon. Back to the issue of the moment. What's wrong with the interface metaphor? It's that it assumes a spatially localized mechanism and a spatially localized body or part of a human that meet or join in a topologically simple way, in a plane or a plug and socket, perhaps like a USB port in one's temple. We all remember Commander Data's data port, which looked suspiciously like a 1990s vintage avionics connector. There are machine-human or machine-animal interfaces of that kind already. They are known collectively as brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs for short, and they have already made possible some remarkable feats, such as partial restoration of hearing in the deaf, direct brain control of a prosthesis, implanting false memories in a rat, and downloading a rat's memory of how to press a lever to get food, and then uploading the memory after the original memory has been chemically destroyed. And there will be more such. The problem for us today is that plugs and ports and all such interfaces are already an inelegant technology that represents no more than a transitional form, one that will soon seem as quaint as a crank starter for an automobile, a dial on a telephone, or broadcast television. What the future will be could have been glimpsed in an announcement from just over a year ago. A joint MIT, Harvard, and Boston Children's Hospital research team, led by Robert Langer, Charles Lieber, and Daniel Cohane, developed a technique for growing synthetic biological tissue on a substrate containing biocompatible nanoscale wires, the wiring eventually becoming a permanent part of the fully grown tissue. What you're seeing now is a photograph of the finished product here. This is skin. This is synthetic human skin with nanoscale wiring thoroughly interwoven within that structure. This announcement came 7 weeks after the announcement in London of the first ever successful implantation of a synthetic organ, a fully functional trachea grown from the patient's own stem cells, work led by the pioneering researcher Paolo Macchiarini. Taken together, these two announcements opened a window on a world that will be remarkably different from the one we inhabit today. The near-term professed aim of the work on nanoscale wiring implanted in synthetic tissue is to provide sensing and remote adjustment capabilities with implants. But the mind quickly runs to far more exotic scenarios. Wouldn't you like full-color video tattoos, one that you can turn off for a day in the office and turn on for a night of clubbing, all thanks to grafted synthetic nanowired skin? I'm not joking, guys. Or what about vastly enhanced control capabilities for a synthetic heart, the pumping rate and capacity of which could be fine-tuned in real time to changing demands and environmental circumstances, with actuators in the heart responding to data from sensors in the lung and limbs? And if we can implant wiring, then in principle, we can turn the body or any part of it into a computer. With that, the boundary between human and machine simply dissolves. The human is a synthetic machine, all the way down to the subcellular level, and the synthetic machine is itself literally a living organism. No plugs, ports, and sockets, no interfaces except in the most abstract conceptual sense. The natural and the artificial merge in a seamlessly integrated whole. I am Watson. Deep blue is me. Here lies the really important challenge from the AI and robotics side to received notions of the body and human identity, namely the deep integration of computing and electronics as a functional part of the human body, essential in ever more cases and ways to the maintenance of life and the healthy functioning of the person. Such extreme deep integration of computing and electronics with the human body surely elicits in most people a sense that we have crossed a boundary that shouldn't be crossed. But explaining how and why is not easy. After all, most of us have no problem with prosthetic limbs, even those directly actuated by the brain, nor with pacemakers, cochlear implants, or any of the other now long domesticated implantable artificial electronic devices that we use to enhance and prolong life. Should we think differently about merely shrinking the scale of the implants and increasing the computing power? Proceed with caution is good advice with almost all technical innovations, but do not enter seems more the sentiment of many when first confronted by the prospect of such enhanced human-electronic integration. Why? One guess is that boundaries are important for defining personhood, the skin being the first and most salient. Self is what lies within, other is without. The topologically simple interface allows us still to preserve a notion of boundedness, even if some of the boundaries are wholly under the skin, as with a pacemaker. But the boundedness of the person is at risk with integrated nanoscale electronics. Control is surely another important issue implicated by enhanced human electronic integration. One of the main points of the new research is precisely to afford greater capabilities for control from the outside. The aim at present is therapeutic, as with our current abilities to recharge and reprogram a pacemaker via RF signals. But anxieties about loss of control already arise with such devices, as witness Dick Cheney's turning off the Wi-Fi capability in his implanted defibrillator. Integrated nanoscale electronics brings with it the technical possibility of much more extensive and intrusive interventions, running the gamut from malicious hacking to sinister social and psychological manipulation. Integrity might name another aspect of personhood put at risk by the dissolution of the machine-human distinction. But it's harder to explain in non-metaphorical terms wherein this integrity consists. Oneness and wholeness, for example, are just synonyms, not explicanda. And perhaps for that reason, it is harder to say exactly how integrated nanoscale electronics threatens the integrity of the human person. After all, the reason why such technology is novel and important is precisely that it is so deeply and thoroughly integrated with the human body. One might argue that a human-machine hybrid wouldn't be less integrated, it would just be differently integrated. And it can't be that bodily and personal integrity are threatened by the mere incorporation of something alien within the body, for then a hip replacement or an organ transplant would equally threaten human integrity, as would a cheese sandwich. A blurring or transgressing of bodily boundaries and a loss of personal control are both very definitely threatened by one of the more noteworthy technical possibilities deriving from integrated nanoscale electronics, which is that wired bodies can be put into direct communication with one another all the way down at the cellular level and below. If my doctor can get real-time data about the performance of an implanted wired organ and can reprogram some of its functions, then it's only a short step to my becoming part of a network of linked human computers. The technical infrastructure for creating the Borg collective has arrived. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile. Were this our future, it would entail a radical transformation of the concept of human personhood, one dense with implications for psychology, philosophy, theology, and even law. Or would it? We are already, in a sense, spatially extended and socially entangled persons. I am who I am, thanks in no small measure to the pattern of my relationships with others. Today, those relationships are mediated by words and pheromones. Should adding Bluetooth make a big difference? This might, however, be one of those situations in which a difference of degree becomes a difference in kind, for RF networking down to the nanoscale would bring with it dramatically enhanced capabilities for extensive real-time coordination of such human collectives. On the other hand, science in an entirely different domain has recently forced us to think about the possibility that the human person really is and always has been socially networked, not an atomic individual, and this at a very basic biological level. Study of what is termed the human microbiome, the microbial ecosystem that each of us hosts, has made many surprising new discoveries. For one thing, we now understand that there are vastly more microbial genes contained within and upon our bodies than somatic genes. In that sense, I am, from a genetic point of view, much more than just my own DNA, so much so that some thinkers now argue that the human person should be viewed not as an individual, but as a collective itself. Moreover, we are learning that our microbes are crucial to much more than just digestion. They play a vital role in things like mood regulation. Recent work pointing to connections between, say, depression and our gut bacterial colonies, with microbial purges and transplants now being suggested as therapies for psychological disorders. This is interesting because we tend to think of mood and state of mind as being much more intimately related to personhood than the accident of the foodstuffs passing through our bodies. There's also new evidence that our microbes play an essential role in immune response. One study released just a couple of days ago suggested a role for gut bacteria in cases of severe rheumatoid arthritis. This is interesting because the immune system is deeply implicated in any discussion of the self-other distinction. Most relevant to the foregoing discussion, however, is new evidence that our regularly exchanging microbes, when we sneeze, shake hands, and share work surfaces, does much more than communicate disease. It establishes enduring shared microbial communities among people who more regularly group together, from families, friends, and office mates to church groups and neighborhoods. And some researchers think that this sharing of microbial communities plays a crucial role in our subtle, only half-conscious sense of wellness and belonging when we are with our family and friends rather than total strangers. This is not science fiction. This is real stuff. Indeed, the definition of stranger might now have to be, quote, one with whom I share comparatively few microbial types. In other words, my being, as part of my essence, a socially networked individual, might already occur down at the microbial level. If so, that is important because it means that purely natural, as opposed to artificial circumstances, already put serious pressure on the notion of the self as something wholly contained within one's skin. We started with my challenging the notion of the interface as the most helpful metaphor for understanding the ever more sophisticated interminglings of computers and biological humans that are now within our technical reach. We talked about new technologies for growing artificial human tissue with embedded nanoscale biocompatible wiring, which implies a deep integration of electronics and computing of a kind that annihilates the distinction between human and the machine, perhaps also the distinction between the natural and the artificial. And we ended with a vision of such wired persons becoming thereby members of highly interconnected social networks in which the bandwidth available for those interconnections is such as perhaps to make obsolete again the notion of the atomic individual. We face a new world. It simply won't do to stamp our feet and just say no. The technology will move forward, at best only a little slowed down by fretting and harangue from humanists. The important question is not whether, but how. Philosophers, theologians, and thoughtful people of every kind, including scientists and engineers, must be part of that conversation. And I thank you. And if you want to be part of the conversation, you can check out this little talk on my blog site, and you're more than welcome to comment there on it. So thank you very much.
Questions or comments for John before we move to the next speaker?
Jerry?
Question about a couple of points that something you might make is that there's
Jerry, I think these microphones have carried on. Others.
some people on, I think, or not. Yeah. Is this on now? Is it on?
Some people, Hans Jonas comes to mind, would say that the line is crossed with the line is between the organic and the digital, so that microbial community, if you will, is still within a kind of organic realm, and there's certain characteristics of organic life that are simply distinct from digital life, so that there's a disanalogy there, and I wondered what you thought about that. And then the second thing, other people would say that, well, after all, as you pointed out, we have all these, we're used to non-organic materials playing a role in various human functions, but what really matters is whether there's some sort of human activity, autonomous activity that is occurring. As long, someone might say, as long as you can switch it on and off, or determine how these different digital materials in you and so forth are being used, that there's no significant line that's really been crossed here. So I wondered, I wasn't sure from the paper how you would respond to those two comments.
Well, time being short, let me just say something on the first point about the organic-digital distinction. I think that's another distinction that is being put under increasing pressure by a variety of new technologies. So here's another study that I just read the other day. There's a group that is trying to create a synthetic neuron, brain neurons, where, in a sense, these will be wholly synthetic. I mean, nanoscale wiring and so on and so forth. But the design concept is that they're trying to replicate precisely the functioning of a biological neuron, right? With the goal of literally creating an artificial brain or creating prostheses that could be implanted in the brain to repair some kind of insult to the brain, a traumatic brain injury or something like that. When I think about that kind of a possibility, where the digital, if you will, is literally emulating exactly, down to this tiny, tiny micro scale, the way electrons move through neurons and so forth, I have more trouble thinking about where the relevant distinction between the organic and the digital is to be found. Well, it's not to say that you can't find a relevant distinction. It's just to say that the technology is putting more and more pressure on easy ways to draw some of these lines, as with just thinking about the interface as the most helpful metaphor for representing the way the computer attaches to the body. Right, so.
One more quick.
Sure. I very much enjoyed the presentation, and just a comment that I'd like then you in turn to comment on. So I actually don't, it doesn't bother me, the thought of these nanoscale integrated technologies, precisely because I don't see a difference in kind between that and an organ transplant, which actually people in the history of medicine objected to for the very same reasons at the beginning. And I think a proper sort of metaphysical analysis of what we mean when we talk about a human person and what the integration is. It's not just about inside the skin and without. It's much more complicated idea of an organism, and the reason why organ transplants don't violate my integrity or my identity as a person is that that organ becomes a part of me. It becomes integrated into my already existing system for the purposes of the mature and healthy development of that organism that I already am. Likewise with the cheese sandwich, right? It becomes integrated into my system and used for my purposes. It doesn't control me from without. Whereas I think the concerns lie in the ability to exploit that technology. So an organ, once it's into your system, nobody from the outside, without your obviously knowing it, right, can come and control it. They could come and control it, but they'd have to, kidnap you and put you to sleep and then do an operation on you, which is much more difficult than if you have remote control accessible nanotechnology. So I think there the concern might be caution in terms of what about hackers? What about the threats to control over one's own artificial body parts because those are now in principle accessible from the outside?
Yeah, well, I'm very sympathetic with that suggestion. That's why I highlighted control as one of the loci of anxiety here. And so maybe the lesson is that we should be arguing more just about technologies of control rather than about bodily integrity and so forth. And let's recall that we've already got sophisticated non-electronic technologies for control. So I'm tightly controlled by advertisers and other people who are using psychological technologies to shape my behavior, and often in totally unconscious conscious ways. So maybe that's the better conversation to be having is how we regulate and how we monitor these capabilities for control.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm very sympathetic to that.
Okay, our second speaker is Adam Keiper, a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, the editor of the New Atlantis, a quarterly journal about ethical, political, social, and policy implications of modern science and technology. And it's published by the EPPC and the Center for the Study of Technology and Society. He's also editor of the NewAtlantis.com and the New Atlantis book series. He's also the director of EPPC's program on science, technology, and society, and a contributing editor to National Affairs and The Current. And Adam's talk today is titled, Till They Have Faces.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Carter Sneed, who I guess has stepped out, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here at Notre Dame. I've never actually been to South Bend before. It's great to walk around. I was walking around last night and I heard the marching band practicing. It was fantastic. And it's wonderful to be on this panel with an old friend and a new friend. I actually was going originally, when Carter and I talked about this conference and this panel, I was originally actually going to talk about neuroelectronics, which is what I call the same subject. But a few months ago at a pub in Oxford, late into the night with Bill Hurlbut and some other folks, we got into an animated discussion about robots. And I decided, it's dangerous when you have these late night conversations with Bill Hurlbut. I decided that I would spend some time looking into learning about robots. And so instead of talking about neuroelectronics, which Don has handled so well, I think we'll talk a little bit instead about robots, about robot bodies, and how thinking about robots might help us better understand what it means to be human. So robots are obviously one of the 3 or 4 most familiar tropes of science fiction, right up there with time travel, which is always a perilous business, and encountering aliens, which never seems to work out well, whether they're friendly or not. And like those other tropes, robots seem weirdly familiar to us today. I mean, some of the stuff that Don was talking about, we've already been softened up for by decades of hearing about bionic men and cyborgs, everyone from the Bionic Man to Darth Vader, right? Well, we've been softened up in a similar way when it comes to robots, right? Sometimes robots have been a source of comic relief, like Rosie from the Jetsons or C-3PO from Star Wars, or sometimes robots are a cause of fear and terror, like in the Terminator franchise, or in the rebooted Battlestar Galactica series, or as a way of thinking about some aspects of our embodiment in our social lives, right? As in the case of the Stepford Wives, which anybody's seen the original, you'll recall it as a kind of an unabashed, open about it, second wave feminism screed in the guise of a robot thriller. Or sometimes robots appear in our movies and TV shows as a tool for exploring philosophical questions about human nature, like Lieutenant Commander Data, whom Don mentioned. The real-life history of robots is far less interesting. It's much more boring. It's, among other things, it's a story of constantly shifting definitions. What is a robot, right? If you go back to the 1940s, you can read these breathless newspaper articles about how robotic waiters were going to completely transform the dining experience. Well, we still have them. We just call them vending machines. That's what they were talking about back then. They called them robotic waiters. People just, got used to them, and they dropped, after the kind of luster of newness wore off, they dropped the robot moniker, which was then reserved for more exotic inventions that were yet to come. And we do that. We drop the adjectives from our technology after we get used to them, right? Our cell phones and smartphones, pretty soon, we're just going to call them phones, right? In a few years, if the robotic cars, the driverless cars that Google is working on, if those catch on, we're just going to call them cars. That's what we do. We drop the acronyms. If the adjectives. If the dishwasher had been invented, after the word robot had caught on rather than before it, we probably would have started off calling it the robotic dishwasher. Maybe it's likely that the word robot, the definition of the word robot, is just going to keep getting pushed back further and further until it's applied just to the one thing that we all can indisputably agree ought to be called a robot, which is a human-shaped, more or less autonomous machine. Now, in some ways, it might seem like it's way too early to have a serious discussion about robots. After all, the things that we call robots today are still very primitive. There's not a robot on Earth that can just go into a room and screw in a light bulb. And this is not meant, as a setup for a bad joke. How many robots does it take to screw in a light bulb? But we can talk about that later. But I mean it quite literally. There's not a machine on Earth, a single machine on Earth, that's flexible enough and adaptable enough to maneuver into a room, carry a light bulb, find the light socket, and without breaking the light bulb, screw it in. Not a single machine on Earth that can do it. So you might argue then that it's premature to have a kind of a technology criticism discussion about robots. Premature technology criticism is, does anybody know what Jello wrestling is? It's a lot like Jello wrestling. We did this as a fundraiser in my high school. It's a lot like Jello wrestling. It's loud, it's fun to watch, right? But it's hard to get a grip on anything because you're talking about things that are still too far out. That's what technology criticism is like when it's premature. When you start talking about robots in public, there's a lot of smugness, right? On the side of the roboticists, the engineers and the computer scientists and the designers and the various affiliated technicians, they've turned kind of futurism into a sort of ideology of inevitability. To that crowd, if you doubt that robots are going to be walking among us, if you doubt that robots, the future of robots is entwined with our transhuman and post-human future, then you're just an ignoramus beneath contempt. But there's smugness on the other side, too, right? Those who are skeptical about the robot ideologues' aspirations and think of them as juvenile tend to dismiss the whole robot project as meaningless fantasy, something that'll never come to pass. And that strikes me as being a critical error for three reasons. First, as fantastical and sometimes juvenile as the aims of the roboticists can be, they're tied to some of the central aims of the modern scientific project, which can be traced back at least to Bacon and Descartes. Sometimes some of the aims of the roboticists can really be traced back to deeper human longings, and we'll get to that later. Second, even if most of the roboticists' dreams never materialize, human life could still be disruptively transformed, even if just a few of them come to pass, and even the pursuit of their goals comes at a price. And the third reason we ought not to just dismiss the roboticists' aspirations just out of hand is just the pace of actual progress in the field. 15 years ago, it wouldn't have been unreasonable to say that robots aren't going to amount to much. Now, though, things have changed. I suspect that in just a few years, there will be robots capable of changing light bulbs. There has been such a steady stream of modest advances in so many fields, in perception and navigation and balance and stability and walking, that it's becoming difficult to deny that autonomous mobile machines are approaching the point when they'll have useful applications. They're already being used by early adopters, hospitals, schools, nursing homes, and there's a thriving hobbyist arena. There are competitive robot building organizations. There are researchers and literally thousands of grad students across the world who are dedicating decades of their lives to building more and more advanced robots. There are gobs of money flowing in from the private sector, and in the public sector, we all hear the stories about the Pentagon and intelligence services too, investing big time in robots. So, what will the robotic future look like? Will robots be our household servants doing our laundry and our cleaning? Interestingly, the word robot comes from a Czech word, which means servant or slave. Will we all own our own robots or just hire them or rent them out? If you know the phrase that's so often used in the immigration debates, right? We need more immigrants because they will do the jobs that Americans won't do, right? I wonder, are we going to use robots to do the jobs that humans won't do? Right? The roboticists speak about using robots for the 3 Ds, the jobs that are too dull, dirty, or dangerous for we human beings. So will they make our lives more comfortable, freeing us up to pursue our animal pleasures so that we'll all become the kind of fat and happy gluttons that you saw in the movie WALL-E, just kind of drinking giant soft drinks and watching fun movies? Or will we be freed up to pursue our more angelic aspirations, high culture and high arts? Or will robots be more like service animals are today, rare and predictable and limited, but useful? Or, as in the title of a 2007 book, are we going to see an age of love and sex with robots? That would certainly put an odd twist on Gil Mylander's talk about generativity from last night. Now, while it's too soon to answer these questions with any confidence, now is the time, I think, to start a serious conversation among those of us concerned about how having robots in our midst might make us think and feel differently about what it means to be human. It's early enough that we can still do something about it, deflect the course of the development of robotics, but it's advanced enough that we can actually start to get a sense of what they might look like, how they might turn out. We don't have time to deal with this comprehensively, but I just want to focus on one sliver of this. I want to talk just about robots and faces. Why faces? Most of the time when it comes to robots, most of the discussions are about artificial intelligence, about minds, about the limits of robotic intelligence. But since this is a conference on embodiment, and this panel is about interfaces, I thought we'll literally talk about faces, human and robot faces, face to face. Most of the things that we talk about when we talk about robots nowadays don't have faces, but there's a large subgroup of robotics researchers hard at work on making robots that do have faces. You may have heard or seen radio and TV interviews with researchers in this field, which is sometimes called social robotics. They aim to give robots faces so that we can interact with them more smoothly, more comfortably, more naturally. Let me give a few examples, and I'll name them, and you can look them up on YouTube later. I didn't want to risk doing something on the screen here. So on one end, there are the simplified robots, the simplified faces, the ones that don't try to emulate a human face with any kind of exactness, but just try to evoke one so as to improve communication. In this category, there's a robot called Kismet, he's kind of the granddaddy of sociable robots. The creator of Kismet is a roboticist. This is Kismet. It's a roboticist named Cynthia Brazil, who is the director of the Personal Robotics Group at MIT's Media Lab. Ms. Brazil made Kismet when she was a postdoc, at MIT, and it looks kind of like a big metallic Muppet. It's got a few facial features, these big eyes with eyelids that can open or close, eyebrows that can wiggle a little bit, ears that go up and down, and lips. It's very cartoonish, but it can convey, in its own cartoonish way, simple caricatures of many different emotions. Another more recent robot on the simplified side of things is named Simon, designed at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Simon looks less like a Muppet and more like a cartoonish boy, like a little boy, simplified cartoonish boy. Another one you might want to look up is named Robo-Thespian. You might at first glance think that the Robo-Thespian is no different than the animatronics you might see at Chuck E. Cheese or the creepy Disney Hall of Presidents. But in fact, when you watch some of the very amusing YouTube videos of the Robo-Thespian, you'll get the sense that this is an entity that doesn't belong with the animatronics, but belongs with you in the audience, heckling the animatronics. So those are the kind of simplified robots. Then there are the more human-like robots, the ones with designers trying to make human-like faces, with colored flesh that matches a human flesh, and very much human-like motions. For instance, they're the creations of the roboticist David Hansen, who got his PhD in aesthetics from UT Dallas after having worked at Disney for years. He built a robot that looks a lot like Ernest Hemingway. I mean, very human-like. It's actually modeled after not Hemingway, but Philip K. Dick, the science fiction author who wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which became the movie Blade Runner. And this Philip K. Dick robot can seem surprisingly lifelike. It twitches, it has these glances and bursts of conversation that really surprise with their hints of humor. Hansen, by the way, says that his mission is, quote, to awaken intelligent robotic beings, grant them sparks of true consciousness and creativity, and distribute these beings and their constituent technologies into the world. Even more remarkable is the work of the Japanese roboticist Hiroshi Ishiguro. His Geminoid robots, Geminoid, if anyone wants to look this up later, his Geminoid robots are often modeled after real people. There's one he's modeled after himself. You can find this on YouTube, videos of Ishiguro-san and Ishiguro-bot kind of hanging out in black turtlenecks. They look very much like geek chic, kind of Carl Sagan 1970s vibe going on. It's a little bit funny and a little bit creepy, but he's done several of these. His robots kind of risk coming close to the uncanny valley, which is the technical term for that creepy zone between the cute caricatures on the one hand, which we find acceptable, and the realistic imitations that we like. So I've been recently poring over the technical literature about all these robots, trying to understand their designers' intentions, and I'm struck by what they all say they're trying to do. They want to study human-robot interactions in order to, quote, understand the physical basis of trust, or to, quote, find biometric axes for emotional recognition. Anything that's measurable, anything that's quantifiable. They claim to have reverse engineered all of the possible expressions a human face can assume and are finding ways to emulate them. What a parched and desiccated understanding of the human being they have. If they had a better schooling in the humanities, they would have understood that it's not possible to reverse engineer human beings in quite that way, which is not to say that they will achieve nothing. So to understand just what they can and cannot achieve, what we have to understand is their subject of study. What is a face? What is a human face? And what are the roboticists missing? Some animals don't have faces, right? They don't have heads. Sponges, for instance, are considered animals, but they don't have heads. The more complex an animal's nervous system is, the more likely it will have an ability to act in the world, and the more likely it will have one of those specialized collections of nerves that we call brains. In evolutionary terms, these things build on one another so that more interactivity with the world and its stimuli leads to bigger brains, while bigger brains in turn permit still more activity in the world, more of what we might call freedom. The first animals with heads were probably certain kinds of worms, and what we call a head was really just a cluster of nerves and the start of a digestive tract. In time, other invertebrates came along with similar designs, models. As the vertebrate animals came into the scene, starting with the first fish species, about 500 million years ago, brains grew larger and required bigger cases of cartilage and bone, and then the first faces, deserving of the name, were on the front of those prehistoric fishes' heads. Over time, especially after vertebrates moved onto land some 350 million years ago and were presented with the surface world and its new opportunities for motion and manipulation, the head became home to still bigger brains and to the array of senses that we all know and love. It's extraordinarily difficult to speak accurately about the faces of other mammals without anthropomorphizing them. That is, without seeing human qualities where they might not be. But of course, there are a few kinds of animals that we anthropomorphized in another sense of the word. We bred and domesticated and lived so intimately with them for so long that we and they can share certain kinds of understandings and moments of recognition. The human face began to take its shape a few million years ago as our ancestors began to walk upright, which thoroughly transformed our senses by making vision the predominant sense, as well as our brains, of course, and our entire bodies. Individually, a human being's face begins to take shape in the womb in the first trimester. Three parts of the head kind of fold together into one. There's a bottom part, which is kind of your lips and your mouth and your jaw that comes upward, and then there's kind of a left top and a right top part of the brain, and they all sort of merge and fold into one. And the meeting point, they're like continents colliding. You can see videos of this, simulations of this on the internet. They're like continents colliding. The point where they all meet in your face is right here. It's the notch under your nose, the philtrum, the notch between your nose and your upper lip. That's where they fuse. More facial features develop in the months that follow, and while our genetic inheritance is a major factor in what we look like, obviously, there are lesser factors in the womb that contribute. Our faces change a lot even in the first few days after our births, and our skulls grow and become rounder and harder. This true story. There are pictures of me and my 3 siblings, newborn babies in our house in New Jersey. And we're all ugly except for my older brother Jason, who's adorable. And I grew up thinking he was just the cutest baby in the world, and I couldn't understand it. It turns out that he actually was so ugly that he broke the camera when he was born, and that picture was taken 2 weeks later when he was much more adorable, whereas the rest of us were just newborns, and we're ugly and lumping and crying. I kind of actually looked like Cyndi Lauper or something, I guess, sneering. Newborn babies can't tell one face apart from another, but they do respond more to things that look like faces than any other visual stimuli, which makes sense when you think about what they need to know at that point in their strange new lives. Soon, of course, most of us become expert at recognizing faces and at reading them as living, constantly changing, expressing surfaces. The most interesting surfaces on Earth, as the German philosopher G.C. Lichtenberg described them. As we age, our faces change. It's a nonstop process. And there are lots of exciting videos you can watch online about this. I'll recommend just one. If you Google Danielle and Vimeo, this is a somewhat CGI video. Maybe some of you saw it when it was first released a few months ago, but it's a video of a single girl aging from the age of, 3 or 4 until old age. And it's very slow. You can't, between any given second and the next, can't tell that a change has happened. But over the course of 5 or 6 minutes, you watch this face take on the shape of first a teenager, and then an adult, and then an old lady. Much of the changing of our faces is out of our control, especially the changes that come during puberty and adolescence, when women's faces tend to become more feminine and men's faces become more masculine and take on plumage down here, and then we start to lose some of the plumage up here. I guess Carter Sneed has left again, unfortunately, but yeah. But what about the famous line attributed to George Orwell that at age 50, every man has the face he deserves? Well, there's some truth to that, right? To some extent, we can influence the development of our faces based on how we eat, we drink, we smoke, based on how much we smile and laugh and cry and frown. You know, the pseudoscience of physiognomy was debunked a century ago, but there's still some truth to the idea that we really do, how we live really does shape our faces. We grow into our faces. We earn the crow's eyes, the crow's feet by our eyes, and the furrows in our brows. And there are other ways our faces can be shaped beyond our control: freckles and moles and tumors, birth defects and other abnormalities, injury and disfigurement, diseases of the skin. afflictions like Bell's palsy, which can leave half of a face paralyzed and drooping. But a normal face in normal health is astonishingly expressive. It is, as the British neuroscientist cum philosopher Raymond Tallis put it, the most sign-packed surface in the universe. Still photographs can't do justice to its fluidity, and even videos can only capture a fraction of the living changefulness of our faces. A smile and a scowl, a flashed grin or a pang of grief, rage or fear or exhaustion or joy or pleasure. The list seems endless, despite efforts by scientists ranging from Charles Darwin to Paul Ekman in the 20th century to categorize and catalog all our expressions and even micro-expressions, which is a term Ekman coined, a word for the unintentional and instantaneous cues that our faces communicate. Perhaps the most familiar thing that our faces do unbidden is to blush. The spontaneous flushing of the face is the result of this complicated interplay of psychology and physiology. It's difficult for scientists to study precisely because there's something that usually happens, because, how do you study it if you can't get your people to do it? It just doesn't happen invited, right? You can't get someone to blush on cue in the lab, although there are surely some of you in the room now trying to think of ways that you could. It gives away, the blush in particular really reveals one of the ways in which we are these mysterious unions of mind and body. And of course, we also take on facial expressions from others. The psychologists call it imitative behavior. The neuroscientists speak about mirror neurons. But here we can just talk about it experientially and say, we copy others. We're swayed by others. And by choice and by not choice, we tend to try to look like others. Now, it's not even 10 in the morning, so I'm not going to talk about the phenomenologists and the sociologists. I'm not going to talk about Emmanuel Levinas and exteriority, or Maurice Merleau-Ponty talking about existing in the gaze of the other, or Irving Goffman and the interaction ritual. But now, at the risk of belaboring the obvious, I just want to say the face is where so much of the magic of our sociality happens. We can sometimes recognize the mood on a face when it's still far away at a great distance, and then there's the face at close-up, at closest up. The kiss, which is a science, it's an art, it engages all 5 of the senses. Stop and think about that. Am I wrong? And it's a step, in a way, toward transcendence. For social purposes, we control and modify our faces. There's things we do in private that we won't do in public as a matter of civility and mores, various kinds of itching and picking and scratching and rubbing. In some cultures, for complicated reasons, women's faces are veiled. In our culture, only at weddings. But our women do often add to their faces with makeup or cosmetics, which comes from the same root word as cosmos, meaning order. And indeed, the controlled and composed and made-up face can be understood as an attempt to push back at chaos with cosmos, to bring some of the most important real estate in the universe, the face, into the fight against entropy. Our language is suffused with words and phrases about face, some of which are very abstract, saving face, facing up to something. Some of our ideas about face are tied to long-standing cultural ideas, like saying that something or someone is two-faced, which doesn't just evoke Janus, the Roman god, but also Batman's nemesis, Two-Face. There's so much more that we can say about sunglasses and masks and dolls and portraits, but my point in all this is just to show, in a very admittedly hurried and cursory way, how our faces are woven into everything about us, from our biology, with its pedigree going back hundreds of millions of years, to our social lives, all the way through to some of our highest cultural longings. The roboticists think of robot faces in terms of levers that can be pulled and pushed, and they think of human faces the same way. They think we can be duped by these machines. It may be that the desire to create robots represents the paragon case of the turn away from believing that we were created in the image of God to wanting to create something in our own image. But in this case, the people doing the creating have just a foggy understanding of who we are. Is it really plausible that robots will be capable of rich interaction with us? Maybe not. I would say probably not, certainly not soon. But that doesn't mean they aren't coming. in some form. And so instead of them rising to our level, will we stoop to theirs? In order to receive the material benefits of their service, will we change how we interact with one another? Will we, in order to accommodate the machines, change what our faces are and what our faces do? These machines, these lifeless and programmed machines, are being designed to give the illusion of life and of mind. If we accept that illusion, even if for our own benefit, are we accepting servants or becoming servants? Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I think in the interest of staying on schedule, we'll defer questions for Adam to the break, which follows the next talk by Bill Hurlbut, a physician and consulting professor at the Neuroscience Institute in Stanford. Besides celebrating the win over Oregon last night, Bill's interests involved the ethical issues associated with advancing biomedical technology, the biological basis of moral awareness, studies in the integration of theology and philosophy of biology. He's the author of numerous publications on science and ethics, including the co-edited volume Altruism and Altruistic Love, Science, Philosophy, and Religion in Dialogue, and also Science, Religion, and Human Spirit in the forthcoming Oxford Handbook of Science and Religion. And Bill's title this morning is Rewiring the Brain.
Thank you very much. Fearfully and wonderfully made. The traditional role of medicine has been to cure disease and alleviate suffering, to restore and sustain the patient to a natural level of functioning and well-being. The medical arts were in the service of a wider reverence and respect for the order of the created world. This idea, put succinctly by the Roman physician Galen, when he said, "The physician is only nature's assistant." But now, with the powers of our advancing biotechnology, there's a new paradigm, one of liberation, technological transformation in the quest for happiness and human perfection. Increasingly, we've come to expect from medicine not just freedom from disease, but freedom from distress, struggle, and even the constraints of natural life process, from all that's unattractive, imperfect, or just inconvenient. And now there are proposals for projects of a more ambitious scope for the conquest of aging, fundamental genetic and neurologic revision, and guided evolution of the human species for post-humans, transhumans, and technosapiens. This is the transhumanist human plus. Okay, that's their symbol. So all of this converges into the most problem-fraught and compellingly difficult question of the mind, the brain, the neurologic substrate of human existence. And it raises fundamental questions of this conference. What exactly is it about human nature that needs or invites revision? What kind of extensions are in keeping with human identity? And where might we violate the fundamental sense of who we are and what is purposeful in a way, this sense of our source and significance? I came across this quote from Aristotle, and I thought it was quite interesting because it could be read either as a call to caution or a call to action, to rewire the brain. It's important to acknowledge at the onset that much of what we do in life is actually rewiring the brain. We remake ourselves constantly. We are a general purpose organism that is adapted for adaptability. An experience-based education and cultural extension built on natural plasticity are the basis of the layers of historical progress we've been talking about. And as we gain scientific understanding of our neurologic development and our patterns of perception, action, and reward, we're gaining skill in managing our minds and tapping into our talents. We are better understanding and refining techniques of self-governance, such as mindfulness practice and better ways of education. And these include computer programs designed to remediate pathological patterns of cognition. Our very word, education, comes from the Latin to lead out a transformative reworking of being. These advances, of course, operate through the natural channels of input, analysis, and output, and generally do not pose ethical controversy except where used for pernicious purposes, though one might reasonably worry about the current one-size-fits-all approach in our standardized public education. Under the category of natural change, we might also include the growing fascination with external brainwave monitoring. Here, the computer brain, the machine-brain interface starts to become more apparent. This is this kind of skull cap technology used for moving computer cursors, programs of positive feedback, and new insights of self-awareness. Interesting indeed, maybe effective, but from an ethical perspective, pretty tame stuff. Nonetheless, there's growing concern that even our natural neurological plasticity could work against us, that computer games and smartphones and social media, all part of our current accepted machine-human interfaces, are provoking an impoverishment and perhaps addictive rewiring of our brains. One psychologist has labeled this techno-liquidity and postulates that entertainment technology has, quote, triggered an evolutionary leap just like the written word 3,000 years ago. On a somewhat deeper level, it's clear that lifestyle patterns of modern culture, some associated with our astonishing material prosperity, are in fact rewiring our brains, though through new kinds of stimulations, stresses, and intensified temptations. Indeed, one shudders to think what the human-machine interface that provides pornography is doing to the brains of today's adolescent males. And at a higher level of rewiring, there are worrisome implications about all this. We know there's a problem here, or at least a challenge. But all these examples I've provided so far are either natural or unintended consequences of neural wiring. They do not, however, provide some cautionary perspective and some experience which we can go forward with. A century of experience with modern psychopharmacology as well, and one might add millennia of experience with psychoactive drugs, have taught us the power of basic biochemicals to rewire the brain. Increasing knowledge of genomics and developmental biotechnology, together with new methods of delivery, will for sure bring us dramatic advances in both research and therapy and targeted enhancements of natural powers. And here it's very important to recognize that machine brain, our brain is in a sense a machine. Not exactly, but there are mechanical or physical aspects to it, and we're learning more and more about how to intervene with them. For example, there are currently nearly 50 neuropsychiatric clinical trials of oxytocin, a basic active biomolecule. You've heard of it, the cuddling hormone. These are exploring remedial rewiring for neurologic and psychiatric disorders, from autism to schizophrenia. But oxytocin plays a role in a range of social dynamics, from basic sexual functions to trust, bonding, in-group solidarity, and out-group aggression. Will we finally have the antidote for shyness, or an adjuvant for marriage counseling? And what will come of DARPA's interest in oxytocin as a gentle persuader for military interrogation, or as the biochemical mediator of platoon loyalty and self-sacrifice? And the reason I bring this up is because, as Don made so plain, this is not an interface. This is an integrated, new kind of relationship. It's becoming increasingly clear that when we think of machines in the future, we're going to have to think of biological machines, seamlessly integrated into our nature. It's been suggested that central delivery of oxytocin and similar agents that do not readily cross the blood-brain barrier may be accomplished using strategically placed implants with wireless remote control or possibly direct stimulation of cellular oxytocin production and release by optogenetics, a kind of these implants could be controlled by these light-sensitive switches. Perhaps one day we will wire in such systems through the infusion of pre-engineered neural progenitor cells targeted with specific migratory addresses. One can imagine a wide range of uses of such remotely controlled release of neuromodulators, especially if accompanied with implanted monitors that could detect early warning signs of anxiety, aggression, or even deviant behavior such as proclivities toward pedophilia. There are also projects underway to develop implantable networks and, as mentioned earlier, neural prostheses that mimic and potentially extend the function of whole neural modules. Scientists at USC have reported that a microchip implanted in a rat's brain can take on some of the functions of the hippocampus, encoding memory patterns and then relaying them for functional implementation. New techniques combining biosynthetic scaffolds, extracellular matrix, different cell lines produced in the lab, and neurotropic growth factors may allow us to generate a wide range of functional units, these quasi-organic units. And these might even be printed out on 3D, using 3D printing technologies which are already being used to print cellular constructions. One can only imagine what possibilities, both wonderful and weird, might come from these approaches. Some years ago, a study that transplanted fetal hamster suprachiasmatic nucleus, that's a center in the brain that controls circadian rhythms. They took suprachiasmatic nuclei from fetal hamsters, transplanted them into aging adults, and the adults' lifespan increased by 30%. So could we now manufacture such implantable remediation units? There are also reports that stable reorganization of motor output can be induced by an artificial connection between two sites in the motor cortex of freely behaving primates. This method for inducing functional reorganization in vivo by using physiologically derived stimulus trains may have practical application in neurorehabilitation, after injury, of course, or could be used for organizing the relational dynamics of conceptual, analytical, or motivational systems. Some neurobiologists believe that such reorganization may underlie the extraordinary artistic or mathematical abilities seen in certain cases of acquired savant syndrome, and they are exploring the possibility of using transcranial direct current stimulation to temporarily provoke such changes in healthy subjects. As one enthusiastic journalist puts it, quote, "Genius lies in all of us just waiting to be unleashed." On a more immediate and probably more realistic level, the idea of brain-computer interfacing could possibly open amazing possibilities for use beyond the direct therapeutic uses for which they're allegedly being developed for paraplegics and quadriplegics, but could be used to bypass motor systems, extend the senses, and even facilitate direct brain-to-brain communication. There is a lot of speculation, but also serious incremental advance, including recent reports by Miguel Nicolaides at Duke of rat studies in which infrared detectors were connected to electrodes in the part of the brain that respond to touch. This study extends early findings that regions of the sensory cortex that naturally process one sense can be recruited to interpret and functionally respond to other types of sensory information, and will even rewire in ways that optimize the new sensory processing. So we can actually create new senses or extend or use old senses for new purposes. In fact, just 8 months ago, these same researchers reported computer-mediated brain-to-brain communication in rats, one in a lab at Duke and the other in Brazil. The first rat was given a visual cue that guided it to press a lever to get a reward. The second rat did not receive the visual cue, but made his choice, which was correct 70% of the time, based on interpreting the transmitted brain activity pattern of the first rat. Moreover, the first rat got an added reward if the second rat chose correctly, and in what research described as behavioral collaboration, became more decisive and generated clearer signals for his mate so he too could get the reward. Or maybe he just wanted to be cooperative. According to reports, Nikolailis has described this study as the first step toward the linking of multiple minds to form an organic computer or brain net that could allow sharing of information among groups of animals, connections that might even lead to one animal incorporating another animal's sense of self. He explains, quote, "We're doing everything wireless and experimenting already with swarms of rats." Of course, such possibilities depend on a reliable and interpretable representation of brain states. Some research scientists suggest that our human mechanisms of mind and mental representations may share enough in common to make this possible, at least on a primary level. According to an article in the New York Times, researcher Gerwin Schack dreams, quote, "dreams of letting people speak with their neurons, issuing silent commands to their machines. You could imagine the word cat," he says, "and it would pop up on your computer screen. The areas involved with imagined speech take just a few centimeters in our cortex, so this might be feasible." Moreover, there are reports that Intel Corporation is developing brain implants that will let people control their phones and computers without needing keyboards, mice, or touch screens. Dean Pomerleau, an engineer based at Carnegie Mellon University who leads the Intel Brain Computer Initiative, reacts to skeptics, explaining, "Eventually people may be willing to be more committed to brain implants. Imagine being able to surf the web with the power of your thoughts." And a video gaming blogger with the propitious name of Marshall Brain explains, quote, "We would like to play video games by having our brain's existing sensory and motor pathways directly connected to the console. This would allow perfect, seamless immersion in a game world." My first reaction is, so what? All right, well, what are we to make of all this? Where is this all going, and how can we make sense of it? The distinction, therapy, enhancement, it's an important distinction at some level, but we know it isn't quite adequate. We know there are moments when such extensions and even violations of pure human integrity, even things that are damaging humans, can be justifiable. After all, we occasionally do sacrifice ourselves for a higher good. What are we to make of all this? If we turn now to make some sense of it, to appreciate how we are fearfully and wonderfully made, we can ponder the very nature of our being, our embodied being. We can consider more deeply the very character of human consciousness and the potential dangers of disrupting its natural process through technological interventions. What will we do? Seek perfect bodies, treat criminal behavior, alter our fundamental genetic makeup and neurologic makeup, transcend our aging problems? Or are we made in a certain way for a certain meaning? 350 years ago, Blaise Pascal noted that human existence is located between infinities, between the infinitely large and the infinitely small. The vastness of the cosmos and the tiniest subatomic particles, the frenzy of molecular motions, and the seemingly changeless backdrop of geologic time. We're located in a particular space, a particular reality of being. Embodied, evolved, and embedded within the ecology of life, we have been shaped in body and mind by the forces of the earth, framed and constrained by the very forces that formed us. Indeed, the very word human shares the Latin root of humus, earth, or soil. We are the creatures of the earth. As the culmination of the central evolutionary theme of continuity and creative elaboration, we are the fullest extension of a phylogenetic trajectory toward integrated awareness, understanding, and capacity for action. We are intelligent creatures within an intelligible world. And I might add, we're often defined as being rational creatures, but we are a psychophysical unity, rational through and through, in our mental as well as our physical substance. We are a general-purpose organism, one that adapts by adaptability and comprehensive control. Yet within this frame of freedom, the meaning of our lives, their joys, their generosities, and sense of transcendent significance are grounded in the very structure and flow of our physical being. Several preliminary points to the potential dangers of technology are immediately obvious. Within the constraints of the natural world, desires, our appetites and passions provide directions and motivate and empower purposeful action. Natural needs and desires keep us socially interconnected and often serve purposes hidden from our normal reflection, including in some of our richest and most meaningful realities, such as sexuality, for example. Sexuality leads sometimes inadvertently to children, which turn out to be a blessing you may not have sought, but is extraordinary, as Gil pointed out. Keeps us rooted, keeps our life in a larger arch of meaning. Now, in our technological era, these desires and pleasures have increasingly become ends in themselves. Natural urges and inclinations are treated as a kind of resource for what the postmodernists have labeled free play, with all the disproportions and dangers that implies. Equally troubling are the direct social dangers, the pervasive and corrosive competition with others, where biotechnology is deployed in the service of vanity and pride, or simply the unbridled quest for position, power, and prestige. Think Lance Armstrong. Finally, and most disturbing, there is at least the possibility that the powers of neurotechnology will be deployed by certain nation states in coercive programs of social engineering and social control, all in the name of building a better world. Notwithstanding the seriousness of these individually chosen or socially imposed violations of human dignity, they are, at least in principle, nothing new to human experience. What is new, and has become the central concern of our age, is the use of these technologies beyond the traditional way humans have behaved to enhance, change, and alter our fundamental relationships with one another and with the world. So let's take a moment, even though we're a little over, I think it's worthwhile. Take a moment to ponder how it all naturally works with this fearfully and wonderfully made body. I want to speak about the biological groundings of consciousness, and here I use the term somewhat loosely to mean self-awareness, mental reflection, and rationality, what we generally mean when we use the word thinking. This capacity for conscious thought is so central to our sense of self that we cannot easily step back to ponder its grounding in our physical being. Yet, when we consider the biological origins of consciousness and its crucial role in survival, it's obvious that human consciousness is the culmination of a wider phenomenon within the story of life. If we trace back the phylogenetic development of the brain from its earliest beginnings some 500 million years ago, it's evident that human consciousness built upon more primary neurological patterns intimately associated with body regulation, integration of sensory input, and control of bodily action within the world. As the neurologist, Antonio Damasio explains, the body, as represented in the brain, constitutes, quote, the indispensable frame of reference for the neural processes that we experience as the mind. Caution, if we change our bodies, we change our mind. This primary platform of fundamental neurophysiology and intentional behavior in the service of survival, experienced as awareness, action, and desire, remains as the core of the modern mind, however much it may be rooted phylogenetically. This means that our capacity for conscious reasoning is itself grounded in a fine-tuned balance of primary evaluations, emotions, and bodily responses, even as it constructs more abstract, symbolic realities. Damasio continues, the evolved body state and responses encoded in emotions carry implicit biological value, and together with the instruments of logic are essential in rationality, allowing us to reason in consonance with a sense of personal future, social connection, and moral principle. Our mind, then, is grounded in the very flesh and flow of biology's structures and life's dynamic processes. The inwardness of self-awareness, imagination, and aspiration are mental extensions in the service of life. Against the dualistic error of the Enlightenment, it is evident that the human person is an inseparable psychophysical unity rooted in the earliest manifestations of our material form. Our thinking is in and through our bodies. Several dangers from biomedical intervention are immediately apparent. First, in seeking to improve our neurological capacities, either through altered genes or drugs or some kind of direct brain-computer interface, we may disrupt the essential physical foundations and fragile balance of our neurologic functioning. Proponents of using direct neural interfaces for purposes beyond therapeutic intervention may underestimate the delicate equilibrium within the natural channels of sensory input, analysis, and action. Our self-awareness hovers like a mental map suspended in space. It feels disembodied, but in fact, it's continuously updated through millions of sensory inputs that provide a constantly monitored and revised image of our state of bodily being. The flow of these inputs is harmoniously governed within highly refined channels that might be easily overloaded, unbalanced, or otherwise drastically disrupted. Likewise, the projects to augment or extend the range of the senses, the balance and cross-modal referencing of the senses, may provide a privileged perception and the foundation for our comprehensive understanding and extensions of thought. V.S. Ramachandran has suggested that the blending of the senses, most dramatically evident in synesthesias, that's where you see numbers and colors and so forth, it's kind of a metaphorical extension through the senses. He suggested that this provides, at a lower level of awareness, but at a higher level, it may be the natural grounding for metaphor, the basis for much of our extraordinary capacity for abstract and symbolic thought. The same concerns arise with projects to technologically reorder the senses. The balance is right. The reorder, like with trying to produce artificial savant syndrome, it's a very dangerous idea, I think. The extraordinary powers of acquired savant syndrome are purchased at a price, the loss of overall integrated intelligence and the capacity for clear judgment and self-governance. This brings us to a more subtle concern, that associated with neurological interventions in mood memory and mental capacities. And here the psychoactive drugs are the most realistic technology of concern, but as I said earlier, these would be integrated as a machine relationship. Through these considerations, we can ponder where neuromodulation really could take us. I'm obviously not talking here about trivial things like red wine and coffee. Being on Pacific Standard Time, I'm lecturing here at 6 a.m. Pacific Time. It's like the Oxford Dawn when they asked him to teach a 9 o'clock class. He said nobody should stay up that late. So consider Prozac. We are all aware that such agents have already provided controversy and widespread concern, and we're at the threshold of technological management and radical transformation of the human mind. Some people say, why should we not use every means available to extend human capacities for perception, performance, or pleasure? Why should we not technologically moderate the powers of mind as tools of our intentions or manage our moods as we do the surface appearance of our bodies? Are we not by nature open and indeterminate, free to express our deepest desires and become whatever we can? What is needed is a deeper level of reflection on the character of the embodied mind and the significance of the natural connections between mechanism, purpose, and human meaning. A thoughtful reconsideration of the actual operations of our conscious awareness will lead us to a recognition of the inseparable connection between conscious experience, memory, and personal identity. Through conscious intention, we place ourself and our actions in the world, especially early in childhood, we place our sense of self and our actions within the circle of cause and effect. In experiencing the connection between free agency, action, and outcome, we probe and penetrate the world, learning at once both the nature of the world and our place and powers within it. Each experience is consolidated as memory, flexibly available to be recalled for specific situations, while providing the platform for both continuity of personal identity and an ever wider comprehension of the world. This natural capacity for comprehensive understanding and capable action within the world is the highest adaptation in the history of life, and to violate or attenuate its formative powers is to lose the very strength of our species and the meaning of our lives. Yet that is exactly the effect of psychoactive drugs and machine modulations when used not to restore the natural balance, but to amplify or improve our human abilities. Disconnected from the coordinated engagement of both memory and conscious intention, the technologically enhanced effect is not an action of the self, but an exogenous intervention acting on the self. Like some kind of neo-magical agent, this bypasses the natural channel of self-conscious control and undercuts the connection between the person, the perception, performance, and pleasure produced. Whether it be focused attention, calm or fine muscle control, or pharmacologically induced ebullience of mood, it does not have the same meaning as the equivalent powers produced through the natural continuity and integrity of personal process. It disengages us from ourself, short-circuiting the connection between effort and satisfaction, and it alienates us from others, shortcutting to a competitive advantage that is corrosive to the very meaning of human community. To damage these fundamental relations is to lose the very freedoms we seek to gain. Self-knowledge is ultimately the foundation for understanding others, which in turn makes possible the capacity for genuine communication and continuity of culture with its attendant magnification of consciousness. Seeking to enhance the powers of the parts through technological transcendence of the limitations of our given nature, we are in fact thrown back to a disorder and disharmony of the whole. We erode the very intelligibility of the world that we are seeking to understand, and we fracture the meaning of our personal and social lives. Indeed, we are a complex psychophysical unity. We have a fragile frame of freedom. The meaning of our lives is there already. We alter it for purposes that are self-absorbed, ambitious, our appetites. We forget so quickly, we get self-absorbed, self-concerned, we forget so quickly the meaningful and powerful drama of reaching out to others. Transhumanism is not the future of humanity, it's the degradation of humanity. It's the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Will we now turn the whole world, like what we've done with the natural world, from the beauty of nature to the machinescape of our modern urban reality? We're a mysterious being. We come forth organically from the earth. We develop phylogenetically, historically, and individually, ontogenetically. Therein is the meaning of this fearfully and wonderfully made being. Thank you very much.
Well, we should thank all the speakers, and given the time, I think if you have follow-up questions for any of them, you can do that. Thank you.
Yeah, having great fun.